Welcome, everyone. It's great to see your smiling faces, or see your blank screen, or see your home offices or your living room. It's great to have you here. This is our new reality, being on Zoom. And so, for those of you who haven't been with us before, my name is Sister Colleen Gibson. I'm a Sister St. Joseph of Philadelphia, and tonight I'm going to act as our moderator for a conversation with Dr. Phyllis Zagano on women deacons. And so, just a little bit of a background. Tonight's conversation is going to be recorded, and so it'll be available in a few days' time on Phyllis's website. We'll give you a link to that so that you can revisit anything that we talk about tonight. You can go back and absorb some of this information, because there's a lot of information, and Phyllis, as you'll find out, is a wealth of knowledge. Our evening tonight is going to be broken into two parts. Phyllis will give a little bit of input to begin, and then we've had people submit questions in advance. Many of you have submitted questions to me via email, but you can also, if as Phyllis is speaking or as you're listening to a response, if you have another question on the Zoom, you can use the chat function to send email or send questions directly to me, to Sister Colleen Gibson. Or if you can't figure out the chat function, you can use my email, s.colleen@ssjnc.org. And so we'll be taking those questions via chat, and I have, as I said, a number of questions. So that'll move us through our evening. And so, just by way of introduction, she needs no introduction, but I will give a little one. So tonight we'll be hearing from Dr. Phyllis Zagano, and she's the Senior Research Associate in Residence and Adjunct Professor of Religion at Hofstra University. She's the author and editor of over 23 books in religious studies, including her most recent, which is Women Icons of Christ, which is available right now from Paulist Press, and you can get it a little bit faster. It's sold out on Amazon, but you can get it from Paulist. She's also written Holy Saturday, an argument for the restoration of female diaconate in the Catholic Church, Women in Ministry, Emerging Questions on the Diaconate, Women Deacons, Essays with Answers, and Women Deacons Past, Present, and Future. Her award-winning Just Catholic column runs monthly in the National Catholic Reporter and in other journals around the world. Her work has won numerous awards and has been translated around the world. In 2016, Pope Francis appointed her to the Papal Commission for the Study of Women in the Diaconate, which completed its report to the Pope at the end of 2018. And as I said, she is a wealth of knowledge, and we really look forward to hearing from her, and we look forward to having you join into conversation. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Phyllis.
Thank you, Colleen. Thanks. You know, it's Easter, so I'm in pink, but you know, I just want to remember the people who are suffering from corona and illness and from food insecurity, because it's a terrible time we have. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about women in the diaconate tonight. We're getting to be 300 folks joining us. I think a lot of folks were surprised, as I was, on Spy Wednesday this year, April 8th, when the Holy Father nominated 10 people to be commissioners in a totally new commission with the Archbishop of Aquila in Italy and a member of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith as its secretary. So we have a cadre of 5 women and 7 men who are charged with, I have no idea. We don't know what question the Holy Father is asking the new commission. I can tell you, I don't know the work really of any of them. I read one paper by one of the members, which he wrote in 1988, in which he connected the diaconate with priesthood, the unicity of order theory. And I know of 2 others, 2 American deacons who are working in the Midwest. But other than that, I've not read any academic work by any of these individuals on women deacons. Now, having said that, going into the first commission, there were only 2 of us who'd done substantial, or I had done the most substantial academic work on women deacons. My colleague, the Belgian Jesuit Bernard Poitiers, had written a book about the diaconate, and in it he had chapters on women deacons. And another member of the commission, shortly before the commission was formed, Karl-Heinz Menke, had written an article in which he connected the diaconate and priesthood. And so I really can't tell you much about the new commission. I can tell you who they are. I know their names. I can figure out or tell you what their jobs are. But when folks have asked me, what do I think? I think that the Holy Father heard, and he said he heard, the recommendation of the commission of the Synod for the Amazon. You'll recall that 9 of the 12 language groups asked for women deacons and asked that this recommendation be shared with the commission. Well, that was me and my colleagues. We then heard the Holy Father say, well, I've heard what you've said. I'll recall the commission and perhaps add 2 or 3 new members. And that's all I knew. And I was in touch with Rome because my travel schedule, I really needed to know so I could be free to go if I was called. Right away, I asked Cardinal Ladaria, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, who was the president of the first commission, if he had any idea. He said, well, nothing's official and there's no guarantee you would be included anyway. I said, okay. So then the next I heard was from another cardinal in Rome who said, well, something may happen around Easter. And that's what we saw. As I said, on Spy Wednesday, 5 women and 7 men were named. 2 of the men are officials of the commission. 5 men are members, 5 women are members. I'll give you their names and kind of tell you a little bit about them. Angelo Lamieri is a liturgy professor at the Lateran in Rome. Henri Pelletier is a professor in France. She actually was the first woman awarded the Ratzinger Prize, which is a prize given to theologians. In 2019, she wrote the meditations for the Holy Father for Good Friday. Barbara Hallensleben is German. I believe she works in Switzerland, however, and she is a member or was a member of the International Theological Commission. Caroline Farry is a catechist from, I think she's from the United Kingdom. I'm not quite sure where in the United Kingdom. Catherine Brown Kasich is an American who specializes in Ukrainian studies and teaches over there. Dominic Serrato is a deacon from the Midwest. James Keating is a deacon from the Midwest. Manfred Hauk is a Mariologist. He's a priest, he's a German priest, and he has written one paper that I know of about women deacons in which he, as I said earlier, connects the priesthood and the diaconate. We could talk more about that. Rosalba Manes, I'm not familiar with. She's Italian. She's written spiritual writing. Santiago del Cura Elena is Spanish. He was a member of the International Theological Commission subcommittee between 1998 and 2002 that created the document that the ITC came out with. We could talk about that more. The secretary of the commission is Denis Dupont-Fauville, who is a French priest and a member of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, a staffer there. I don't know his job there. And the president is Cardinal Giuseppe Petrocci, who is the Cardinal Archbishop of Avila. He was named to that position in June of 2013 by Pope Francis. He had been a bishop since 1998. He's now a member of the, if I remember correctly, of the Congregation for Catholic Education, and of course the president of the commission. So that's the crowd. I can assume that they are able to consider what is the position or what is the job of a deacon today. What do deacons do? And when I think of that, I'm reminded of Pope Francis's comment, get the deacons off the altar. Because if you have deacons in your parish, they're either fabulous or they're not. And the Holy Father is very, very interested in the diaconal work of the church, not so much the liturgical diaconal work of the church. And not that it's not important. I think it's important if you have someone doing diaconal work that person on the weekend should be proclaiming the gospel and preaching on it. But because that individual is living the life of the word, the liturgy, and certainly charity. You know, I look at Colleen Gibson here before me, and she's doing diaconal work, much more diaconal work than probably anybody else in Camden, New Jersey, feeding hundreds of families in the center that she participates in. So that let me just do that for an introduction. I think the question before us is, what do deacons do? And what about diaconal work is impossible for a woman? And these are things that I discuss. I was chided last time making a plug for my last book, but you have to understand when you're an academic, you're always thinking about your work. So I'll be talking about what I've done. Anyway, that's where we are. So Colleen has questions. Why don't we jump in and get to them?
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Phyllis. Well, there were a number of questions about the commission, and so I'm trying to sort through kind of what you answered, what you aren't going to be able to answer. But do you see, one of the questions that came in, you talked about the connection to the Synod on the Amazon and Amazonia. There were two questions that came in about the Amazon. The first was, do you think this commission, the second commission, was called in response to perceived pressure of the Amazonian Synod? Do you think there's any connection between the two?
I wouldn't call it pressure. It was a request of the Synod for the Amazon. I think it's, if my memory serves me, it's paragraph 103 in the final document that says that there was a great deal of discussion about women in the diaconate. We know statistically 60% of the parishes in the Pan-Amazon region, the nine countries that surround the Amazon basin, we know that 60% of these are parishes are managed by women, mostly women religious. And there was a significant discussion about women deacons in the Amazon. The Holy Father, as I said earlier, said, I have heard what you've asked for. I know what you want. And later at the press conference in late October, I want to say October 26, it was reiterated, I think, by Cardinal Michael Cherney, a Canadian, who said that they would recall the commission, which is my commission, of 12 members, 6 male, 6 female, with Cardinal Ladaria as president. So I don't know that pressure would be the word. I think the Holy Father is known for his interest in serious discernment. So I would sort of applaud him for continuing the study. I'm not quite sure, how he intends to do it. I understand today that Cardinal Parolin met with the officials, the state officials, to talk about reopening the Vatican, to reopening the services of the Vatican. You know, that many services, they're losing a ton of money with the Vatican museums closed, but they seem to wish to return to normal. Having said that, they've canceled World Youth Day in June and just moved it from June of 2020 to June of 2021 in Rome, and then canceled another event that was to be held in Lisbon in 2022 and moved it to 2023, August of 2023 in Lisbon. So but pressure, I don't think is quite the right word. I think the Holy Father is seriously discerning this. I've heard comments that he's now got a commission to study the commission, and he'll probably name a commission to study the commission that studied the other commission. But that's not irony. That's I think not trusting in the work of the Spirit in the Church. So,
thanks, Phyllis. Some people asked, as the questions came in and are kind of coming in over the chat, about the differing opinions or the positions that people might be coming from. You spoke about not necessarily people doing academic work, but people being in different fields. And so do you get a sense of the backgrounds or the opinions that people on the commission might have?
as I said, I'm not really never heard of most of them. And some of them have spoken against women deacons, but I don't have the substantial, I don't have the substance really to make a judgment on what they might say. And we don't know what the question is. You see, my intuition is the question is, what does a deacon do? Period. And then the further question would be, well, what of this can a woman not do? And if we, as I said earlier, if we talk about the diaconal work of the church, I think the Holy Father wants to focus on charity. I think he wants to focus on catechesis. I think he wants to focus on community. And in various cultures, it's impossible for women to undertake these positions, but in most cultures, it's just not. So I don't know. You see that, to my mind, the only arguments against women being ordained as deacons, there are two. One, women cannot image Christ, which to me is heretical. And the other is the iconic argument, and they, not the iconic argument, that is the iconic argument. The other is the unicity of order. And we'll start with the unicity of order. There is an argument that that women cannot be ordained as deacons because women cannot be ordained as priests. That presupposes that the priesthood is part of the diaconate, but that happens to be counter-magisterial. In Lumen Gentium 29, the diaconate and the priesthood are clearly distinguished. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 1500 and something, the diaconate and the priesthood are clearly distinguished. In the Code of Canon Law, Canons 1008, 1009, the diaconate and the priesthood are clearly distinguished. Pope Benedict the 16th in 2009 wrote a document called Omnium Inventum that said basically the diaconate is not the priesthood. Well, now, if you say, if you can be ordained a deacon, you can be ordained a priest, I said, well, you know, women were ordained as deacons, so you're saying women can be ordained as priests, and then they get hysterical. The teaching of the church is that the church does not have the authority to ordain women as priests. Where did this problem come from? Well, there's a thing in the, basically around the 12th century, it became solidified and codified, a thing called the cursus honorum, the course of honor. And no one who was not going to be a priest could be ordained a deacon. So what happened to the women deacons? Well, they just faded away by the 12th century. We do have some in northern Italy who didn't get the memo. And the bishop there in Lucca kept ordaining women as deacons. But basically, you couldn't be ordained a deacon unless you were going to be ordained a priest. And so the diaconate basically fell apart and died out, except for ceremonial deacons, usually 7 ceremonial deacons in cathedral cities. So the cursus honorum really maintained itself as a custom, but not necessarily as a law. And then when you get to the Second Vatican Council, and particularly in 1972, after the council, Paul VI, with Ministerium Quaedam, suppressed the minor orders, okay, lector, porter, exorcist, acolyte, suppressed them, and you ended up with the installed ministries of lector and acolyte. He suppressed the major order of subdeacon, and he made it clear that the major order of deacon could be a standalone order. That is, an order that could be held permanently. And we now have some 45,000 men, mostly married men in the world, who are deacons as a permanent vocation. So while the cursus honorum has gone by the wayside formally, I don't think it has gone by the wayside so much so in the public imagination. So that's the problem of the unicity of order. The other problem is the iconic argument. And that means women, what that says is women cannot image Christ. The iconic argument was brought out in 1996 by a document called Inter Seniores against women priests. The iconic argument was dropped in 1994 from the second document about women priests, Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. In 1997, the International Theological Commission had a subcommittee that came out with a positive recommendation, actually, for women deacons to be ordained. But that 17-page document, although it was numbered and printed, was not promulgated by the prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith at the time, Benedict XVI, or excuse me, Cardinal Ratzinger. In 2002, another document came out, and that's the one that got published. And the part about the diaconate, section 4, was really, I think, written by Cardinal Mueller, who at the time was a professor in Germany. He became a bishop right after it was published, and then became the cardinal in charge of the Congregation to the Doctrine of the Faith. But when I studied that document, the 2002 document, the section on women deacons has 18 sections or paragraphs or sentences, either paraphrased or plagiarized from original work by Cardinal Mueller without citation. In that document, the term in persona Christi servi, in the person of Christ the servant, comes up. It's the first time we see it about the diaconate. We really have the deacon previously in nomine ecclesiae, in the name of the church. Why would they want to have in persona Christi servi? Well, because in persona Christi capitis ecclesiae, in the person of Christ, the head of the church, is the priest. So there is more than intimation in the 2002 document that the deacon, like the priest, must image Christ. And it's very interesting because this is, where's my math? 8 years after it was dropped from Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, the iconic argument is resurrected in the document by the International Theological Commission subcommittee about women deacons. Now, that's where the title for my book comes from, and I'm going to show it to you. I was sitting at table with an official of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and he said that the reason women couldn't be ordained as deacons was because women could not be icons of Christ. And I said, watch me. So that's kind of where it came from. I'm talking too much. Give me another question.
Oh, it's fine. We're here to listen to you talk, Phyllis. One of the questions that's come up in the comments and following up on the commission and the makeup, and you gave a really good overview of all the members, is have you heard anyone comment on, or do you have any insight into that the makeup of the commission? There doesn't seem to be anyone from Latin America, Asia, or Africa, from the developing world. And so has anybody commented? Have you heard any comments on that?
Well, sure. I mean, it's pretty obvious. There's no one from the global south. There's no one from Asia. There are, I mean, it's highly Eurocentric, and I have no idea how these commissions are made up. I do know at the first commission, the Holy Father agreed to the request of the International Union of Superiors General, asked the executive director and the president to submit 8 names as nominees and to hand deliver them to Casa Santa Marta, where he lives. And we assume that he also asked the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith to nominate individuals. And I was one of the 3 nominated by the International Union of Superiors General, who was accepted and appointed by the Holy Father. The other 2 were Nuria Kalduk Benaj, who's a professor of scripture at the Gregorian and and a member of the Pontifical Biblical Commission. And the other was Sister Mary Malone, a Franciscan sister who was the rector at the time of the Antonianum, the Franciscan theologate in Rome. She has since been, and former president actually of the Italian Theological Commission, the Italian Theological Conference, and she has since been elected as the head of her religious institute. So that's how that crowd came about. Looking around the room, I would say it was predominantly Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith tentacles reaching in, or members, people who were advisors or actually members of the International Theological Commission. and one or two who I felt were just direct picks of the Pope. The brilliant group of individuals with serious academic credentials and a real devotion to academic work and intellectual pursuit. Second commission, I have no idea who chose them, how they were nominated. I have not heard that the International Union of Superiors General was asked to nominate people. So such as I say, it's all a mystery.
Life is a mystery. Phyllis, there are a number of people, kind of questions that came in today. There's a number of people on the call tonight who may be new to the topic or maybe new to our conversation. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about early women deacons and the historical precedent for women deacons, because a number of questions came in along those lines.
Well, the only person in scripture with the job title Phoebe, deacon is Phoebe, who is said to have brought the letter to the Romans. In 1 Timothy 3:11, the qualifications for deacons are listed, and in the middle of the qualifications, the comment is made in various translations, and the women also. And most scholars agree that that means, well, you know, the women deacons have to do this too. The development of the diaconate, I think is separate. You know, I'm nervous here because I know John Collins from Australia is on the call, and he knows more about the word deacon than anybody else on the planet. But I think that the notion of the word deacon, which I'm told means messenger or running after the master in the dust, as well as servant. We know about the development of the diaconate as it grew, but we don't know everything about every place at every time. We know, I think more, at least I know more about what women deacons did than what men deacons did. And whenever I'm accused of overstating my case, I say, well, you know, women deacons anointed, sacramentally anointed women. And I have no evidence that men deacons sacramentally anointed dying men. You know, maybe they did. Women deacons, particularly women deacon abbesses, heard confessions in the territorial abbeys. Women deacons catechized, women deacons kept order in the women's part of the assembly. Women deacons certainly, and this is what you'll hear a lot, oh, all they did was help with naked baptism. Well, come on. Women deacons anointed, they were very much part of the sacrament of anointing. And this comes to mind now when we think of the dreadful situations with Corona. Bishop Rosansky, the Bishop of Springfield, Massachusetts, wanted to take the canon, I'll think of the number, the canon, it's paragraph 2, but I can't remember the canon, that allows for an instrument to be used in anointing, meaning you could put the oils on a cotton ball, for example, rather than on the hand or the fingers of the priest anointing. And he took that to mean, well, the instrument could also be a doctor or a nurse. And he was slapped down very quickly. I think I said that in my column today or yesterday. He was slapped down very quickly by the Vatican. But the fact of the matter is, women deacons did anoint. They anointed sacramentally. And this was given to me in spades by actually a Maronite bishop who said, of course, they anointed sacramentally. And of course, they were sacramentally ordained, because you would never have anyone touching the sacred, getting involved with sacred activities, unless that person were ordained. We know that women deacons preached. We know that women deacons served at the altar. How do we know women deacons served at the altar? Well, because Pope Gelasius complained about it. In the 5th century, he was saying that it was disgraceful that women were at the altar doing what men do. Well, what do men do at the altar? Men deacons were mixing the wine with the water at the altar, you know, but they were near the sacred. And in subsequent eras, we have bishops and priests talking about Pope Gelasius. Well, you know, so what? This is the 21st century. We don't need to be so concerned about that, I don't think, at least in our culture. Does that help?
I think that does help. Another question, kind of follow-up question to that, for those who asked about the origins of women deacons and the early history. Why did the practice not continue? Kind of how do we see that historically? Women deacons kind of phase out or end. Why did that happen?
It's interesting. A couple of things. First of all, the whole diaconate died out. As I said earlier, in the 12th century, you had the problem of the cursus honorum. If you weren't going to be ordained a priest, you could not be ordained a deacon. It was as simple as that. Well, women were never in the cursus honorum. Women were never in the stages to become priests. So the female diaconate also, coincidentally, by that time, had been pushed into the monasteries. So the woman who was a deacon was more likely to be the abbess of the monastery or abbey, and she also, or prioress of the monastery, abbess of the abbey, and also, or more likely, someone who could be a heavy, who could lead the prayers. So you very often had, and we have evidence of this from John Chrysostom. There was more than one deacon, woman deacon, in a given monastery. But typically the need for the woman deacon was for anointing and was for leading prayer. But that died out in a couple of different ways. The abbeys were beginning to die out across Europe. The territorial abbeys maintained their jurisdiction actually until the 19th century, until Pius IX, Pio Nono, said, no. You know, women cannot have this kind of authority. But it just did, because if you basically the cursus honorum, and there was the diaconate, it just kind of went away. Now the diaconal work of the church continued, because as you see the diaconate dying out, and really the diaconate to me is the work of charity. As you see the diaconate dying out, you see various examples of women and men forming religious communities. We have Francis of Assisi. There is a story that when Francis explained to the bishop what he wanted to do, the bishop said, "Sounds like the diaconate to me." And there's all sorts of consternation about whether he was or was not ordained a deacon. But it is the care of the poor. It is the preaching of the gospel to the poor, to the people who didn't have the advantages of education. Move through the centuries, you have diaconal works. You have Catherine of Siena taking up diaconal work. She's burying the dead during the plagues of her century. And then when you get to 14th, 15th, 16th century, you start with the development of what came to be apostolic religious orders, typically in response to a plague. In the plague in Rome, a men's order was formed, but women's institutes began to be formed around the 16th century, and you have various waves of the creation of women's institutes. A great wave in Europe in the mid 19th century of women's institutes. I think as I said, the diaconate, I think, was picked up. The work of the deacon was picked up by religious, and there's to me, an odd separation, because religious institutes are all self-capitalized, and yet the diaconate is connected to the household of the bishop. I said to a bishop once, who's now a cardinal in Rome, I said when he was a bishop in America, I said, I don't want I'm not so much interested in priesthood. I'd rather have a diaconate and have access to your checkbook, because I think that's what it's about. The deacon is, and historically that's what the deacon did. You know, you went to mass and you brought your chicken, you brought your egg, you brought a blanket, you brought some money, you gave it to the deacon. The bread and wine that was brought in the procession of the deacons to the altar in various times of our history became the very stuff of the sacrifice. And then when you were leaving, if you needed something, you went to the deacon. You know, instead of banging on Colleen Gibson's door for your, you know, your block of cheese and rice, you went to the deacon and you got what you needed. And the last person online was the bishop, was the priest who would get his pay out of the money that was brought in. So I think things got reversed a lot. And I think there's a feeling that the collection belongs to the priest. And I really think that the collection of the church belongs to the deacon, belongs to the people of God. And so I guess I'm much more radical than I might sound when I talk about women deacons, because I think women are more likely to have this crazy idea that maybe we should give money to the poor, you know, but that's just me.
This is a more of a generic question, but it kind of builds on the history that we've kind of been developing here. And so one of the questions that came in is, are there reasons you think why the issue of women deacons has come forward in our time, why it's come to the fore right now in our history?
I think the needs of the church. You know, I've said this often. The Spirit knows what she does and moves as she will, and the church will not be denied what it needs. This is a conversation. A basic part of the conversation is whether women were ordained or not ordained sacramentally. Well, that conversation's been going on for 400 years, and 400 years ago, a scholar found that they were. And 300 years ago, someone found that they weren't, and the fight's been on ever since. But I think that the needs of the church are calling forth the diaconate, has called forth the diaconate is a permanent vocation for men, and I think it's calling forth a permanent diaconate is a permanent vocation for women. As we see in the Synod on the Amazon, you know the phenomenal work that women are doing in the Amazon, which is not to say, and I have to say this about Querida Amazonia, the Holy Father's response, we got a little off, but the final document calls for women deacons. The Holy Father, in his response, Dear Amazon, Querida Amazonia, says, it doesn't say anything about women deacons. But what he does say in paragraph 94, footnote 136, is that the people who are, basically, I'm interpolating here, the people who are running parishes are professionals, and they should be acknowledged by their bishops and made permanent, given permanent work, perhaps on a rotating basis, but to have some permanence and ratification by their bishops. Well, what is footnote 136 referred to? It refers to Canon 517, paragraph 2, which speaks about parish life coordinators. In the United States, we have about 347 folks, men, women, religious, married men, married women, deacons, who are actually the managers, the heads, the parish life coordinators of their areas, their parishes, who then contract for sacramental services. And they may contract to deacons, or they may contract to priests for sacramental services. What I see the Holy Father saying in that particular paragraph 94 of his response, entitled Dear Amazon, Great Amazonia, is really a radical response, saying, you know, that the people have to take back the church. And the person, he says this quite specifically, the individual who has the culture and the language needs to be the one to be the coordinator, if you will, the parish life coordinator of the parish. And I think he's directly opposed to parachuting somebody in from another continent who's a priest and say, poof, you're the pastor. And then I've seen this in the far west. I've seen this in California in a parish, Holy Family Parish in South Pasadena, California. The parish life coordinator is a woman, she's a married woman, and has some crazy number of employees, 20, 24, including a couple of priests, and the parish hums along. I think that I have great respect for the model of the parish of the pastor of the parish being the head of the community. But I think we also have to recognize that it's the community that that creates the cohesiveness, and the community that that brings forth the grace of sacrament to each other in other ways besides the celebration of Eucharist, which of course is central as a celebration. But it needs to be a celebration of something. It needs to be a celebration of the work of the parish. Anyway, I went off there. I hope I didn't go too far.
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine, Phyllis. A number of questions came in about the way in which we do the diaconate, the way in which people view the diaconate. And so, kind of to begin on that line of questioning, because the connection that we've already discussed that's often drawn between the priesthood and the diaconate, which we know, there, unless you're a transitional deacon, that connection, we've already been through that. But because of that connection, a number of people asked, do you think that no matter how Francis decides on women deacons, it could sow division? So would that require do you think there's more of a need for a deeper understanding of what the diaconate is, or for women to do diaconal work? Would it be the development of a new model of doing something without calling it deacon?
Yeah, well, there's several questions there. In terms of Francis deciding, there's no doctrinal teaching against the ordination of women as deacons. There's an extrapolation that Canon 1024, only a baptized male is validly ordained, which really means validly ordained as priest. That canon comes from the Decretals of Gratian, which were created around the time that the Cursus Honorum. So no one was being ordained unless he was on the way to priesthood. So there's that. I think that the determination, Francis would simply have to agree or let the people of God know that there's no objection to ordaining women as deacons, but it's up to an Episcopal conference to ask for that basic permission. And the Episcopal conference would have to agree first that it's needed in their territory. He's just given the green light for the area of South America to have a new Episcopal conference. They want to ordain women as deacons. Now, ordaining women as deacons in Brazil, if a particular bishop, you see, if the conference agrees that women can be ordained in the territory, then each individual bishop would need to decide what he wants to do in his diocese. And if a bishop in Brazil decides to ordain women as deacons, well, then a bishop in Brazil decides to ordain women as deacons. It does not force the hand of the Archbishop of Chicago. And it's really, as I've said, and I said tonight, the church will not be denied what it needs. And I think it has gone too far and too long in allowing the self-capitalized ministries of women religious to carry the load, the complete load of the diaconate. I think the religious life is a specific way of living the Christian lifestyle, and because of it, it allows thousands and thousands, and has allowed hundreds of thousands of women around the world to do diaconal work, to do what is necessary, do whatever is necessary is the words of one of the founders of an institute I know about, but all of it is on their own nickel. Sisters open schools and to teach the rich and thereby capitalize their work among the poor. Sisters started hospitals in the United States. We have fabulous examples. Started hospitals, started care facilities, started colleges, schools, you name it, and all on their own. And when I'm reminded Dorothy Day had the Catholic Worker, and she was not very kindly thought about by the chancery. And the cardinal or bishop wrote to her and said she had to remove the word Catholic from the Catholic Worker House. And she said, if you, fine, I'll move to Brooklyn. And that was the last she heard about it. So but I don't think it's that big a deal. But on the flip side of that is it is a big deal, because what are the arguments against women in the diaconate? Well, the priesthood unity of order doesn't hold, and the only one is that a woman cannot be an icon of Christ, that a woman cannot image the risen Lord, which is a naive physicalism, as Elizabeth Johnson says. So if the church wants to say, you can, as Cardinal Casper did in 2006, women can dress up and they can march around the altar and they can be called deaconesses, but we wouldn't ordain them. I think that would be playing into what the problem is in the world about women. And I've told cardinals and bishops at table in Casa Santa Marta, where I lived many times when on the commission, I'll blame you for FGM. I'll blame you for wife beating. I will blame you for dowry burning. Okay, I will blame you for all of the abuses, the rapes and murders of women around the world, until you are willing to say, by ordaining women and having them stand in St. Peter's as deacons, until you do that, I'm going to blame you for the troubles of women in the world until you ordain them. And when you put it that way, you know, our church needs to do what it says. It's what it says. It says we're all made in the image and likeness of God. Well, if so, show me. I think there's a show tune about that. Anyway.
Don't start singing and dancing, Phyllis. You talked about women's religious orders, and an interesting question that came in that's different than questions that we've received in the past. And I'll read it directly. It's a little bit lengthy, so hang with me. The question is, are permanent deacons only ordained in a diocesan context? By that, the questioner says, I mean, are religious orders able to form and prepare candidates for the diaconate who would then remain in service of the religious order? The questioner says, I don't think I've ever seen a Jesuit or a Benedictine permanent deacon. I ask this because it would seem women's religious communities could greatly benefit from permanent women deacons within their own order.
Well, there's a couple of questions there. Yes, I know, actually Dominicans, I know, have a couple of men who are deacons. I knew of 2 in Ireland and 1 in the United States. The Jesuits, I don't know. They have religious brothers in the Society of Jesus. The Benedictines as well have religious brothers, friars. But I can't imagine why not. I mean, if it was the vocation of the man to be a deacon. Women's religious institutes have an interesting situation because by accepting women who either were ordained as deacons, accepting them as members, or by accepting their requests and giving permission to the women who wish to be ordained as deacons, they would become mixed clerical and lay. But in talking with canon lawyers, they said it really wouldn't make that much of a difference because the diaconate is not the priesthood. You know, hate to sound like a broken record here, but there are lots of canons that say only a priest may have governance over another priest, but it says nothing, it's not over another cleric. So the head of a women's religious institute would not necessarily have to be a deacon if she had members who were deacons. Now, we look back in history, and as I said earlier, the abbess was typically ordained as a deacon, but then, of course, the job of the abbess is to preach the gospel, to preach in chapter, to proclaim the gospel, and I've seen this actually. I've seen the abbess bless at the end of Sunday Lauds. I've seen and other prayers. I've seen the abbess actually bless the sisters, you know, with the sign of the cross. I think that it could happen, but that's not how it happened historically. There was a need in enclosed monasteries and abbeys for the abbess to be ordained and to have other people ordained, such as I said earlier, for ministering to the sisters to anoint the dying, to bring them viaticum, and also the abbess deacon, who was of a territorial abbey, as I said earlier, had the authority at some points not only to hear confessions but to appoint priests, to give faculties to priests. Even today, technically speaking, the head of a religious house who invites a priest to celebrate the Eucharist separately allows him to preach to her nuns. But that's the 12th century, and people don't remember that, but it's true now.
A question that's come in a couple of private chat questions to me and a couple of public is regarding the promotion of the diaconate within dioceses, and also you were talked about Episcopal conferences, and so the question, it's a two-piecer. The first is, do you think that the diaconate is being promoted around the world? So the questioner asks, Ireland only has a few dioceses with deacons, and other countries since Vatican II are not promoting the diaconate. So that's one side of it. And then another question that came up is, should an Episcopal conference ask for permission to ordain women, or should a bishop or a conference do it, just do it? What do you think would be more likely or better way forward?
Well, I mean, bishops didn't become bishops by not following the rules, which doesn't keep them from doing what they want. But the further question about how it would happen and whether it's promoted, I think that the Holy Father wants discussion. The fact that there are fewer deacons in Ireland is because, first of all, the diaconate as a ministry was only accepted in the Irish 26 counties, actually, of the Republic of Ireland, I would say maybe about 10 years ago. So then it took a while for folks to be trained. In Ireland, the last time I looked, or the last time I was over there, I was on a Fulbright about 4 years ago. About half of the Irish bishops did not want to have deacons at all because they couldn't have women deacons, and they wouldn't have deacons until they could have women deacons. So the flip side, I think, is quite clear there. I know that the bishop of I forget the name of his diocese, but his episcopal seat was in Ennis, announced that he wanted a diaconate and closed that down in 2 weeks because the women of the diocese said, look, we're doing all the work. Why are you bringing in a cadre of individuals to put over us when we're the ones who are doing the work? So I think that the Holy Father would prefer consensus, even if it's consensus from an Episcopal conference, saying we want women deacons, just as he has said, actually, if you want married priests, just ask me. So the Synod on the Amazon kind of very clearly said they wanted to ordain married men as deacons. But he, as I said earlier, he went around that question by saying, wait a minute, no, we're talking about the parish, and make sure the parish is run by people who have the culture and the language. So if Sister becomes the 517 paragraph 2 parish life coordinator, and she sees Jack the deacon who's married, and she might recommend to Jack and to the bishop, if Jack feels the vocation, that Jack could become a priest and a sacramental minister, but not necessarily the pastor. And Sister may not feel the vocation to the diaconate, but she may have, Mrs. Well, not in the South. She wouldn't be Mrs. O'Leary. You'd have Mrs. Mrs. Sanchez, and maybe she would have the vocation to the diaconate. So I think he's really breaking things up here, and it's wonderful that he's exploding the conflation of tasks and duties and ministries in our church.
I think it's an important point you make there, Phyllis, about consensus and he really wants consensus in the process of this. And there's a couple of comments in the chat really about, lifting up women in leadership roles and seeing that and pointing to what's been happening in the Amazonia and in the global South. So I think that's great. There was a series of questions, Phyllis, that came in about kind of next steps and initiatives. And so one of the questions is, what is the best avenue for voices to be heard on this topic? Can you recommend organizations or initiatives that people should support or that are going on?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. A couple of things are happening. There's an organization called Voice of the Faithful, which is headquartered in Massachusetts, somewhere near Boston. And I understand that they have, to their members, are asking or inviting their members to join a virtual book clubs. I'm not clear whether it's one book club or they're going to have separate book clubs, but they're making arrangements to have people sign up, and then they will send electronic copies, PDF, I guess, or somehow ebook of this book, Women Deacons, Past, Present, Future, which actually has a free study guide on my website. So folks are asked to contact somehow. I haven't seen, I saw something, I haven't seen the exact wording, but to contact Voice of the Faithful and to sign up to be a part of a book group, and they will arrange for the folks to get an electronic book and put them into some kind of book group. And I'm not quite sure how the mechanics of that are working. The other thing I know about, I think you have a thing from a catechist in North Carolina, Casey Stanton, who wants to connect with other catechists and folks who are interested in creating prayers of the faithful, writing prayers or having prayer services. Do you have her email there? I thought we had it.
Yeah, I'm pulling that up and I'm trying to find the Voice of the Faithful book group, but I'll put that in the chat, Casey's information that she sent.
Voice of the Faithful, I think, I didn't look, but Voice of the Faithful may have their information on their web pages.
Okay.
But Casey Stanton, oh, here it is. Email, here, Donna Doucette. Email dbdoucette@VOTF with the names and email of those interested in participating in a chat group with friends. So there's that. And then Casey Stanton is a catechist. Folks need to talk about it. The church needs to make its interests known. The Holy Father waits, and he's talking a lot about the Holy Spirit this season. If you're watching his masses, the Holy Spirit needs help in this respect, and I think for us to voice, for people to voice what they're interested in. If you want I've said this many times, if you want your bishop to find out what you're thinking, all you have to do is write a letter to the editor or an op-ed and put his name in it. And if it gets published, it'll be on his desk in 15 minutes, so.
Great, okay. Let me we're coming right up on the hour here, Phyllis. And so there are a number of great questions that I think we'll pick up at another time. This might be a good question to bring our conversation to a close on. People, a lot of the questioners and a lot of comments that came in, people were talking about being discouraged by this and not really seeing a whole lot of movement or seeing movement that is inconclusive. Like we said, life is a mystery. So one of the questions that came in is, how do you remain grounded in the midst of all of this and trusting in the will of God and the movement of the Spirit?
How do I, or how does one?
How does one, I guess. The questioner asked in terms of them. They wanted some advice. So
it's the answer is the same. I really think, it's a question of prayer. It's a question of understanding, there's one how many billions of people, a huge number of Christians in the world, whole bunch of Catholics, and a whole bunch of Catholic women. It is very, very discouraging to see some of the things that are said about women. So I would argue that those people have to be ignored. You can't. I mean, when I see some stuff that's said about me by some of these bloggers, people who answer things that I have had published in articles or things that are in Facebook. You can't. I was told a long time ago, you can't defend yourself and you can't answer everything. But staying grounded is being grounded in the risen Christ. I mean, it's not about me. It's about the church, and the church is you. The church is the neighbor. The church is the stranger. The church is the relative, and the church is also the enemy. So I think it's really seeing Christ that keeps folks grounded. But personally, I would start and end with prayer and hope. My Skype, on Skype, they ask you for your mood, you're supposed to, so I put in the optative mood, which is, your grammarians will like, so.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to leave on. So, Phyllis, in this season that is all about hope and about resurrection and about prayer, and this season that the pandemic has kind of placed us in to give us time to reflect, it's a good thing to do, to always come back to prayer and to trust that the Holy Spirit will guide us. So thank you so much to everyone who's on here. Phyllis, do you have anything else you want to say?
Yeah, can I say something?
Go ahead. Yes, you in the back.
Somebody said to me that I should do a Zoom on the new book. And I don't know if you can see it. And they were going to prepare notes for me so I could kind of explain the arguments and what's in the new book, because it's about, here it is, it's about the ministries that women have had. And it's not to sell the book. We were chided last time that I held up the book and somebody was upset about that. But I talk about women in altar service, women involvement with spiritual direction and confession, and women involvement with the anointing of the sick. So maybe what we can do is ask folks if they want to put it in the chat, if that's a good idea. We can do that if folks would be interested, or we can do part of a thing on it. So. But anyway, we'll be here next month sometime as soon as Colleen and I figure out our calendars, and we'll pray for each other until then, okay?
Wonderful. That sounds great. Well, everybody have a good night or good morning if you're in Australia, and we will see you the next time we're together. Thank you again. God bless.
Bye-bye.